Good evening, Benjamin. I want to thank you for joining my interview. This interview is for my class, Gender and Society, and we're widely discussing gender in the sociology world. And so, in this interview, we're going to explore three topics. We're going to explore dichotomization of gender, we're going to explore feminism and how dichotomization is encompassed within it, as well as gender expectations and a bit of essentialism. And then we're going to explore what gender, essentialism, and gender expectations can result in. All right, first, gender is a social construct created by society to place a difference between the biology of the female body parts and the male biological body parts. According to Creating a World of Dichotomy by Crowley et al., gender is a product of Western cultures that was created to organize and make sense of ourselves. They highlight that gender is done rather than innately in us. In what ways do you think gender is done? And do you believe there is a term that highlights in what ways gender should be done?
So by gender, by what you're asking, by what do you mean by gender should be done? Oh, like how we organize it.
How do you believe that each individual should act with it? So, how do you feel like women who identify with the female gender, how do you think they should do gender? And how do you think males should do gender? Because gender is not innately in us, we act in gender. So, just touching on that.
Good question. So right, like you said, right, gender is the two social constructs of male and female that was developed by Western cultures. Um, for the typical convention is when we think about the male gender, a lot of people will think about, okay, right, strong, protector, right, fighter, advocate, and then for women, the construct is right, more empathetic, lover, um, let's see, what else? Caring, kind. And so it's these qualities that really determine, what box of gender that people are placed into. And so you're asking me how I think gender should be done, like how
Yes.
I
Do
think it should
you?
be organized.
So, what you explained to me was how society views how gender should be done. You list out some characteristics. But how do you align with that, or do you have a different view on it? How do you think that gender should be done?
I don't particularly align with it because um it creates sort of you're sort of trying to place people into two boxes, even though some women or some men reflect across the two. So I don't think it should be done in such a polarizing way. I think the problem is with the two social construct is that there's such a glaring difference in face of many overlaps, and so that is definitely an issue. So the way I would do it is I wouldn't exactly. I would honestly not exactly like put even make social constructs like that, right? Because it really puts social pressure on, right, women and the men to do certain things, to act in a certain way that may not align with their personality. It may not align, right, with what they think about themselves. It may not align. You know,
I want to touch on your point of alignment, how people don't align with certain, let's call them gender expectations. We're going to discuss gender expectations because that is a point that you brought up unknowingly. So I want to discuss that with you. So, gender expectations are norms for how society believes the male and the female gender should act and display. They are the ways that highlight how gender should be done. As a male, what do you believe are the expectations required out of your own gender?
for our own gender, the typical requirements are right protector. You're supposed to be strong. You should be, and you should be strong. Number one, you should be strong. Uh, you should, professionalism, right? Strong protector, leader of the home. Leader of the home is a big one, and it's kind of. I will say that it does differ. It does differ, right? Among certain countries, even within the Western culture. But I mean, the general consensus is right. The leader of the house, right? You
Right.
lead the family, right? And protect the family and provide for the family as well. With it's more like a spectrum, I would say, in terms of right. for countries among the Western culture. But yeah, that's the general consensus.
Okay, so your expectation is that well, the expectation that you view in society is that males are required to be the protector, provide for the household. So I really want you to hold on to what you view as society's expectations for the male gender for our last subject, which explores the effects of dichotomization. Um, so I want to also head into the term dichotomization because we haven't went over it yet. Dichotomization is the divide between the male and the female gender. The divide essentially emphasizes the biological differences in gender and expectations required out of each gender. So, what are some examples you think of that reinforce dichotomization of gender? A clue is gendered bathrooms.
Ah, so what forces this dichotomy? I mean, like you said, right? Gender
Yeah.
bathrooms, and then it's interesting, but because your parents will also influence that, right? It's almost like when you're a kid, when you're growing up as a young child, right? The boys, right? You might, buy certain toys for your kids, right? Dress them a certain way. That kind of reinforces that gender on them at such an early age, and we see a lot of this.
Yeah.
I would say it's called like impression, right? You're impressing something onto your kid, regardless to who they are, right? You think, okay, you should play with these toys or these toys. But one of the most important things is school. In schooling, it's also reinforced, right?
Right.
Because when you get to a school, right, there's a little bit of, I would say, conformity when you look at school, right? When you look to other students, right, who are going to the school, right? Parents will also feel pressure, right, to maybe protect their kid, right, from being bullied, being isolated, and so we do see that reinforcement. The way that I think it's also the way that we treat, right,
Right.
people also reinforces that chromatization, like you said.
Dichotomization, yes. So you believe that what reinforces it is how, society treats individuals. A boy, he would be looked at weirdly by dressing like a girl?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of dives into how gender expectations do play a role in reinforcing dichotomization. I want to give you some other examples just to think upon is men shouldn't cry, but women can. That's a divide that, men are believed that they're biologically made to suppress their emotions, and women, because they're more nurturing and more loving, they're more free to express their emotions. So there's this dichotomization, this divide between the male and the female gender based on alleged biological differences. And then another one is men are providers and women are not. Women give birth, they nurture, and then males do not give birth or nurture, they just reproduce and protect the family. That's another example of how alleged biological differences work in reinforcing dichotomization of gender. So the main concept that we touched on that reinforces gender dichotomization is what Crowley et al. Defines as essentialism, which involves the belief that there are real differences between men and women that reside in the body. So those biological differences that I pointed out. What are your views on that?
Uh, well, obviously the first biological difference, right? Right, the private part. Although, right, it can be.
Yeah.
I think if we go back to the genetics, I think epigenetics is a really, has been an exciting field for the past 50 to 100 years when we started really understanding it. So when you go back and when you look like way back in history, and you look into these old societies where women had a really clear defined role versus men had such a clear defined role, people seem to underestimate how that could impact your genetics.
Okay, now that we have covered dichotomization and a bit of gender expectations, I want to go ahead and head into feminism. So, according to Bell Hooks, feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexual exploitation, and oppression of women. The primary goal is to stop sexism, and sexism is the belief that one gender is greater than the other. For myself, feminism is about women gaining equal rights to the male gender, the rights that men experience within this patriarchal system today in society. From a male's perspective, what do you believe feminism is and do you support it?
I think feminism is a great movement where, women are really, I mean, like you said, right, fighting for equality and, equality, equity, and certainly, being, but I feel like more so feminism is a movement to kind of break out this construct of a female to kind of because right it's just because the really the where we see sexism come in is these stereotypes, right? This idea that we try to fit woman in a box, and so feminism is more than, okay, I can gain equal pay, right,
Right.
or have the same opportunity as his men, but it's more so breaking out of that box, and showing that women are equal to men, and I wholly support the movement.
Yeah.
There are women that I know that are very smart, very talented, very talented, and so the idea that men are better, I mean, it's just not true. It's just not true at all.
I love that. Thank you for your support. I do want to highlight one verbiage that you use, break out. And I think that's going to be a very important verbiage that we're going to explore in a topic called essentialism, which we brought up before, where essentialism is basically the belief that there are real differences between men and women that reside in the body, and essentialism reinforces that divide in gender. So, a main issue within feminism is unfortunately essentialism. Well, a main issue in feminism is essentialism. Based on what we went over in essentialism, could you tell me, do you believe it is an issue within feminism? Why or why not? I know I didn't give you all the information, but I just want to get a gauge on if you think that it does have a real effect on feminism.
Okay, so essentialism. So right, the essentialism is there are differences in the biology, which is true, right? There is differences in the biology, but I don't believe that those particular differences have anything to do with certain qualities.
Yeah.
Like they may confer certain biological advantages, right? So for example, take the kid that's like, you know, grows up, right, that has a there are certain genetic advantages, and it's not just right across women, it's across male, right, but those genetic advantages um aren't exactly the determining factors of the qualities that you have, that I have. So women are very intelligent. There are women who are very talented, and so this idea that the innate biology does not have to determine, right, the influence on the environment.
I think that you worded your answer so perfectly. And I do want to touch on when you said that essentialism becomes a problem when women take on that perception. And it is a problem because women do take on that perception in feminism, where we do take these biological differences and we highlight them in the patriarchy and we say men are stronger, they're oppressing women, and we take on this victim mentality. So we're taking on this, oh, women are oppressing the household, we can't do as much as men. And then versus men who just reap all the benefits of the patriarchy, they oppress women, they're stronger than us. It is something that occurs in attempts to highlight the injustice that happens against women. We do accidentally essential reinforce essentialism of gender, unfortunately. Right. So you don't believe that. So do you believe that essentialism is a problem within feminism, or do you not believe that essentialism is a problem in gender?
I
Yeah.
don't believe it may be I will say it's a problem when women do accept that perception and
Yes.
believe that when women accept that perception and think, okay, a man is stronger than me, or a man can do this better than me, or is better than math than me, then that does become like an issue, because then that means you're less likely, right, to go forward with this feminist movement.
So I do want to move on to our last theme, which is what gender dichotomization, essentialism, and gender expectations can result in. Because after all of this reinforcing from feminism, from gender expectations of dichotomization and essentialism, I just want to highlight that an effect can be for males hegemonic masculinity, which, according to Silva et al., hemogenic masculinity is the idealization of the traditional dominant man. So I want to ask you, what do you believe the traditional dominant man is, and in what ways does it relate back to gender expectations?
All right. So the traditional dominant male is simply right. You lead the household, and you really it's more so about right control. Is that as a man, right? You should right control your household, right? Have dominance over your household as well as kind of the final say and leader. Um, but you know, also with that comes the pressure. Because it gets interesting when you go to the workforce and when that's not exactly reality.
Right.
So I feel like what happens a lot is that the violence that we see in the homes, right, in terms of dominance, is that because men don't experience the same thing on the inside of the household as the outside. When you go to the outside world, as a male, you don't have this kind of dominance when you're working under someone. You have a boss, you have a manager. You don't have the total control. So they try to compensate by starting that possibly at home, right? Because it's been reinforcing you for so long that some men believe that that's what they are, and they have to maintain that control. And it's not exactly at work, but maybe maintain control where they can maintain control. So they feel like they're not losing themselves. And so this traditional, it's sometimes damaging, when we talk about it.
Benjamin, I swear it's like you have my notes in front of you and you're basing all of your answers off of them because your answers lead so beautifully into my points. And I want to highlight when you said how when males on the outside world can't live up to this standard of the hegemonic masculinity, they oftentimes overcompensate. And we're going to dive into the term of male overcompensation, which, according to Lauren Madden, male overcompensation is the reaction men have when their masculinity is threatened. So I do want to ask you, I know you just touched on it just a couple seconds ago, but what does masculinity being threatened mean to you? And in what ways do you think that males overcompensate?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about when your masculinity just feels threatened, you feel like as a man you're losing control, right? You don't have exact dominance, right? You just feel like you know yeah. And I feel like when it comes to right this idea that you don't have this masculinity, um, you just don't have control. A lot of it is about control, right?
Right.
Controlling your household. And so when you lose that, it can lead to a lot of things, right? Anger, frustration, because you likely will not find it in the workplace. So someone might be a CEO, but that's not every male, right? The average male is not a CEO, right? You're working on this someone. You have to answer to someone. And in some cases, I think what may hurt is that some of these bosses are women that they are under. And so they
Yeah.
have to listen to women. And so when they come home, they may feel a certain type of way and think, oh my, like I can't even have control, right? I don't have dominance. I have to listen. It kind of makes them feel, I would say, some sort of oppressed when they're not used to feeling that way, right? Because society tells them, or their parent, or what they're raised as, you should be leaders, to be dominant. And when that's reinforced, throughout your entire childhood, and then you're just not experiencing that in the real world, right? You might want to come home in whatever area you can be dominant, and in whatever area you can be, um, very masculine, then they will be to still hold on to those ideals that have been reinforced in them since a child.
And you are reading my mind. That was the next point that we were going to dig into. What's reinforcing this idea that men have to reach this hegemonic masculinity are the gender expectations placed on them. So when they fail as provider or they fail as leader in the workplace, which thanks to feminism is a result of women being allowed to dominate those workplaces, males may overcompensate by utilizing traits that they believe they can fulfill, such as just, dominance. And the easiest way or the medium that is available for them to assert dominance could be in the household against their wife. This could contain physical abuse. This could attain verbal abuse. It could be over regular civilians. And a bit of what we touched on in class is that majority of male shootings are committed by males because they want that sense of control. They want to gain a sense of that lost masculinity, but it's done oftentimes in a violent way instead of a another medium. So I do want to ask you, just wrapping up, do you believe, like after all this information that we have covered, that dichotomization and gender expectations have contributed to male overcompensation?
They certainly have. Because I mean, like you said, we've seen the society begin to change, the society begin to shift, right? Through feminism, right? They had, and it's dichromatization had definitely contributed to this idea of male overcompensation, right? Because back then there was really no need to compensate. Like, women would hardly even attend schools. Like, they would not even allow women to even attend schools. So men really didn't have to overcompensate, right? Because they had all that knowledge, and like they say, knowledge is power. But now that women have this, I wouldn't say the same, right? Because the movement is still building up, and right, we still need to see more equality. But now that women have access to a lot of the similar resources, and we're beginning to see them excel in the mathematics and all of these disciplines, that we thought, okay, that men probably thought, okay, only I can dominate. Now it becomes this overcompensation of, because they're losing that idea that's been reinforced in them that men are stronger. Okay, well, some women are stronger, right? They play sports.
Right.
Some women are stronger now. Some women are smarter, right? They're in these positions, they're CEO positions, right? They're managers, they're business leaders, they're future visionaries, right? They're representatives. And so this kind of breaking down is this society that's been reinforced in these men. Like, they're trying to get it back, right? They're trying to gain back that control. They feel like when you've been reinforced in something as a child and it's basically all you've ever seen, and now you're seeing a totally different reality, it's somewhat hard to adjust. So,
I value all of your points. I thought that you explained very well that dichotomization is a big problem in gender in male overcompensation because of those gender expectations involved and the reinforcement that has been involved in them growing up. The reinforcement of the gender expectations that males should be providers, males should be able to do this, and when they can't fulfill, it creates that lack of masculinity that they're attempting to fill, overcompensating. I also want to thank you for joining this interview. I loved all your points. Thank you for your open engagement. And we're going to wrap it up.
all right, awesome. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Of course. Thank you, Benjamin.